There are people the world thinks it knows completely. Faces it sees every morning over coffee. Voices it trusts the way you trust an old friend's voice on the phone. And then there are the things those same people carry alone. In quiet rooms, in hospital corridors, in the middle of the night when the cameras are off and the makeup is gone and the only audience is the ceiling above the bed. What happens when the woman delivering the forecast with that warm, steady smile is quietly living through a storm no weather map could ever predict? What does it cost a person to keep showing up, day after day, bright-eyed and sure-voiced, when grief and loss and fury are pressing against the inside of her chest like something trying to get out? And here is the question that might stay with you longest. How many times can one life be asked to start over before starting over stops feeling like hope and starts feeling like survival? She has stood in front of cameras for more than 2 decades. Her voice has been the first sound in millions of American mornings. She has laughed and smiled and delivered the news about hurricanes and blizzards and cold fronts with the kind of warmth that made the weather feel almost manageable. But behind that face, behind those eyes that always seemed to know something reassuring about tomorrow, there was a story unfolding that was far more complicated, far more painful, and far more human than anything she ever reported on air. Her name is Janice, and at 55, her story is one that most people have only seen the surface of. The surface is remarkable enough. The underneath is something else entirely. She was born in the kind of place that shapes you whether you want it to or not. Ottawa, Canada, a city of cold winters and quiet pride, where the seasons are not polite suggestions but full commitments, where snow doesn't fall so much as arrive, settling over everything with an authority that demands your attention. Janice grew up there in the 1970s, the daughter of a family that was not wealthy, not connected, not the kind of family that opened doors for you simply by bearing its name. What they had instead was something quieter and more durable, a sense that you showed up, you tried, and when things were hard, you kept going. She was a girl who loved music and performance from the very beginning. There's a version of Janice that exists only in childhood memories, standing in front of a mirror, pretending the hairbrush was a microphone, performing for an audience that existed purely in her imagination. That image, of a girl practicing for a life she couldn't yet name, is one that threads through everything that came after. The mirror, the practice, the performance despite the absence of anyone watching. But childhood in Ottawa was not simply the bright parts. There were harder textures too. She has spoken in the years since about feeling like an outsider in ways that were difficult to articulate, not belonging quite fully, searching for the place where she fit. School is a particular kind of laboratory for that searching, and for Janice it was no different. She was funny, but funny doesn't always protect you. She was warm, but warmth can be mistaken for weakness when you're young and the world around you is still learning its own cruelty. Radio found her, or perhaps she found it, the way people find the things that were always waiting for them. She began working in Canadian radio in her early 20s, and something in her clicked into place the moment she sat behind a microphone that was actually connected to something, that was actually being heard. Her voice had always been her instrument, and here finally was the stage it was built for. She worked hard. She moved. She built. She believed. The move to the United States felt enormous. It was the early 2000s, and Janice was chasing something that didn't yet have a clear shape, only a direction, only a pull. She landed at Fox News Channel in New York City, and the city received her the way New York receives everyone who arrives with ambition and very little else. Indifferently, exhaustingly, and with a kind of accidental beauty that catches you off guard on random Tuesday mornings when the light hits the buildings just right, and the whole island looks like it was built specifically for the moment you're standing in it. She became the senior meteorologist, the face, the voice, and she was extraordinary at it. Not just technically competent, but genuinely gifted at making weather feel like something that connected people rather than disrupted them. She had a way of delivering the difficult forecasts, the blizzard warnings and the heat advisories that managed to be both honest about the danger and somehow still warm. People trusted her. They tuned in specifically for her. She was, by any measure of the industry, a success. And then her body turned against her. It began subtly, the way the most frightening things often do. Fatigue that seemed deeper than it should be. Weakness that settled in her legs and refused to lift. Strange sensations that she initially explained away. Stress, overwork, the physical cost of living in a city that moves at a pace designed for something other than human beings. She ignored it with the particular determination of someone who has built everything through sheer force of will and therefore believes that can solve almost anything. It couldn't solve this. In 2005, Janice Dean was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. She was 34 years old. Multiple sclerosis is a disease of the nervous system, a disease where the body attacks itself with a precision that feels almost personal, eroding the protective sheaths around nerve fibers, disrupting communication between the brain and the body in ways that can be unpredictable and relentless. For a woman who was on television every day, who depended on her physical presence, on her energy and steadiness and the capacity to simply show up and perform, it was not just a medical diagnosis. It was a reckoning. She has described the moment of receiving that diagnosis in ways that make you understand exactly what it feels like to have the floor shift under you. Not fall away entirely, not collapse, just shift subtly and permanently, so that you are suddenly standing on something that was solid this morning but is different now, and you cannot quite trust it in the same way. That shift, that moment, it comes back again and again in how she talks about her life. The moment before and the moment after. She did not tell many people immediately. This is worth sitting with. She was living this terrifying new reality while continuing to appear on national television, while smiling into the camera with that familiar warmth, while doing the job that the world knew her for. The gap between what was visible and what was true was enormous. And she maintained it, not out of dishonesty, but out of a fierce private need to understand this thing on her own terms before she offered it to the scrutiny of a public that she served professionally, but that she could not fully trust with her vulnerability. She has said that her faith was the thing she returned to in those early months. Not loudly, not performatively, but in the specific, quiet way that faith operates for people who actually use it, as a source of steadiness when everything external is shaking. She prayed. She looked for meaning. She asked the hardest questions of whatever she believed was listening, and she kept going. The mirror from childhood, the girl rehearsing alone, was there in this too. Practice. Performance. Even when the audience is only God and the ceiling. She met Sean Hannity's producer, Sean McManus. No, she met her husband, Sean Newman, a Fox News anchor. They married. They built a life. And she found, in that partnership, something that the ambition and the career and the recognition had never quite provided on their own. The sense that she was witnessed not just professionally, but personally. That someone knew the whole map of her, not just the forecasts. They had sons. 2 boys who became the center of the universe in the way that children become the center of the universe, without ceremony, without announcement, simply by arriving and being exactly themselves. And if the story were only the MS diagnosis, and the marriage, and the boys, and the career continuing bravely through a condition that required daily management and quiet courage, that would already be a story worth telling. That would already be a life that deserved careful attention. But 2020 arrived. The pandemic came to New York like a slow disaster that suddenly became a fast one. In March of that year, the city that never stops moving stopped, and Janice Dean lost her parents-in-law, Michael and Eleanor Fusco, to COVID-19. Within weeks of each other. Both of them. Gone. There is no careful or sufficient way to write that sentence. Michael and Eleanor Fusco died in New York State nursing homes during the first wave of the pandemic, during the period when the Cuomo administration had issued a directive requiring nursing homes to accept COVID-positive patients, a policy that many believe directly contributed to thousands of deaths. Janice Dean's family was among those thousands. Her husband's parents were among those thousands. She was in television every day. She was managing her MS. She was raising her children in a city in lockdown. And she was grieving, privately, enormously, with the kind of grief that doesn't fit inside any framework you have available. Not the ones from childhood, not the ones from faith, not the ones from any of the hard things you have previously survived. And then she did something that changed the course of her public life entirely. She spoke. She spoke publicly and without softening about what had happened to her family. She named names. She asked questions. She demanded answers from the governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo, about the nursing home policy, about the deaths, about the accountability that she believed was being avoided. She became one of the loudest and most persistent voices calling for an investigation. She testified. She organized. She connected with other families who had lost loved ones in similar circumstances. She became, without ever planning it, and at enormous personal cost, an advocate. This is where the story takes on a different texture entirely. Because Janice Dean was a meteorologist. She was the weather anchor. She was not, by professional definition, a political figure or a policy activist. And she stepped into that territory deliberately, knowing the exposure it would bring, knowing the attacks that would come. And they came, they did come, because she believed that what had happened to her family deserved not just tears but action. She wrote a book. She called it Make Your Own Sunshine. And the title was chosen with the full weight of everything she had been through behind it, not as a dismissal of darkness, but as a statement about what you do in spite of it. The book was not a neat success story. It was specific and honest about grief and about the particular exhaustion of fighting systems that are larger than you while also managing a chronic illness, while also being a mother and a wife and a professional who shows up every day. The girl with the hairbrush in front of the mirror, the one practicing for something she couldn't name, had become a woman practicing something harder than broadcasting. She was practicing being a full human being in full public view, with all the grief and fury and love and chronic physical difficulty that entailed. Multiple sclerosis has no cure. It doesn't resolve. It is managed, and some days it is managed better than others. In some seasons of life it flares in ways that require the kind of accommodation that a person in her position has to negotiate quietly and constantly. She has spoken about the symptoms, the fatigue that is not ordinary tiredness, but something deeper and more categorical, the difficulties with heat, the moments when her body does not quite cooperate with what she is asking of it. She has spoken about these things not to solicit sympathy, but to document what it actually looks like to live with a chronic illness while maintaining a professional life, a family life, a public life. At 55, Janice Dean has outlasted a diagnosis that many people believed would diminish her. She has outlasted a political figure who she publicly held accountable and who has since resigned in disgrace. She has survived the particular grief of losing family members in circumstances that felt preventable and that have never been fully addressed. She has written. She has advocated. She has continued to appear on television with that same warmth and steadiness that made people trust her with their mornings. And yet, the questions remain. The investigations into nursing home deaths in New York have been incomplete. The accountability that she demanded has been partial at best. She carries that incompleteness. She carries the grief for Michael and Eleanor, who should have been at birthday parties and school performances and the quiet Sunday dinners that constitute a life, and who are instead part of a policy debate, a statistic and a tragedy that the world has already mostly moved past because the world moves fast and grief moves slowly. The hairbrush from the Ottawa bedroom, the microphone it became, the camera it led to. These objects are the architecture of a life spent practicing presence, spent learning how to be seen. But the most significant moments of Janice Dean's life have happened in the private spaces. In the doctor's office where she received a diagnosis she didn't expect. In the hospital where she said goodbye to people she loved. In the quiet of her home, where she is simply a mother and a wife navigating a body that requires more management than it once did, living in the aftermath of losses that do not diminish. She has spoken about faith not as an answer, but as a companion, something that walks alongside you in the hard places without necessarily explaining them. This is a particular and mature relationship with belief, the kind that doesn't demand resolution from God, but simply asks for company. It is the faith of someone who has been in the dark and learned that light doesn't always mean the dark is over. Sometimes it just means you can see a little further into it. Her legacy is still being written. She is 55, and 55 is not an ending. It is a particular vantage point from which you can see both a long way back and still a long way forward. From that vantage, she has said things that suggest she is not done asking uncomfortable questions, not done pushing for the answers her family deserves, not done showing up with the weather and the warmth and the specific realness that has always been what people actually loved about her. Now it is your turn to sit with this for a moment. Because here is what Janice Dean's story asks of you. Not as entertainment, not as biography, but as something closer to a mirror. You have seen someone keep showing up. Keep doing the work. Keep being present in the camera and the courtroom and the grief and the hospital and the manuscript and the morning show. All of it simultaneously, all of it at once. And you might be tempted to call that exceptional, to file it under a category of human experience that doesn't apply to your life because you are not on television and your losses have not been witnessed publicly. But here is the truth that lives inside her story. Every single one of those things she carried in private first. The diagnosis was private before it was public. The grief was private before it became advocacy. The fear and the fatigue and the faith. Those happened in rooms with no cameras, in moments that looked from the outside exactly like ordinary life, because from the outside, most of the hardest things do. You have carried things in private that the people around you don't fully know. You have showed up on days when showing up was the entire achievement. You have practiced, in your own way, in front of your own kind of mirror, for a life that sometimes cooperates and sometimes does not. And the question her story leaves you with, the one that doesn't resolve neatly, the one that is worth carrying with you after you close this video, is this. What would you do if the thing you were asking for never fully came? If the accountability you needed was partial? If the illness was managed but not cured? If the losses remained losses and the world moved on before you were ready? What would you do with the hairbrush? Would you put it down? Or would you keep practicing? Not because the audience is watching, not because the outcome is guaranteed, but because the practice itself, the showing up, the refusal to be reduced to only what you have survived, because that, in the end, is the only kind of sunshine any of us actually makes. Janice Dean is still making hers. What about you?